The afternoon sun slanted through the window of Felicity Hart's small seamstress shop, casting golden bars across bolts of calico and gingham stacked against the wall. Dust motes danced in the light, peaceful and indifferent to the trembling in her hands as she held the ledger page. She had found it 3 days ago, tucked inside the lining of a coat brought in for mending Victor Hale's coat. The foreman of Hale & Company had a reputation for meticulous dress, and she'd been surprised when he'd left the garment behind after collecting his repaired vest. Perhaps he'd forgotten it. Perhaps he'd never imagined a widow's seamstress would discover what lay hidden in its silk lining. Platinum Pass Mine. Mercury Tailings Disposal, Snake River, North Bend. 47 barrels monthly. Hayamovi, a Lakota, who had drifted west as a solitary trapper, and Scout had been living along this river for a season. The words were written in a tight, efficient hand. Beside them, columns of numbers tracking months of dumping. And clipped to the page, a freight receipt signed by someone named S. Thornton, authorizing transport of waste from the stamp mill to the river. Felicity's late husband Thomas had taught her to read and cipher, unusual for a woman, he'd said with pride, but useful. Now that skill felt like a curse, because she understood exactly what these documents meant. For 6 months, livestock had been dying along the Snake River. Cattle staggered and fell frothing at the mouth. Sheep went blind and wandered in circles. And then the Garrett family's twin boys, who'd been swimming in the river's shallows, had fallen ill with tremors and strange rashes that wouldn't heal. Old Doc Morrison had been baffled, muttering about poison in the water, but unable to pinpoint a source. Now she knew. Mercury poisoning. The gold mine was dumping amalgam tailings mercury directly into the water, and it was killing everything downstream. Her fingers traced the evidence sewn carefully into the hem of her dark blue calico dress, the only place she'd felt safe hiding it. The stitches were small and tight, invisible unless you knew where to look. 14 months since Thomas's death had taught her caution. A widow alone learned quickly that the world was not kind to women without protection. The shop's bell chimed. Felicity's heart lurched. She forced her expression into careful neutrality as she turned. Victor Hale stood in the doorway. He was a man of perhaps 45, with steel-gray hair swept back from a broad forehead and eyes the color of Winter Creek ice. His suit was immaculate dark wool despite the heat, and his boots shone with fresh polish. He smiled, but the expression didn't reach those cold eyes. "Mrs. Hart," he said, his voice smooth as oil on water. "I apologize for the inconvenience, but I believe I left a coat here several days ago. Dark brown wool blend." Her mouth had gone dry. "I'm afraid I haven't seen it, Mr. Hale." "Are you quite certain?" He stepped further into the shop, his gaze sweeping the small space with methodical precision. "I'm quite sure I left it here. Perhaps in the back room. I keep careful inventory, sir. There's no unclaimed coat." The lie tasted like ashes, but she kept her voice steady. His eyes settled on her, assessing. For a long moment he said nothing. Then that cold smile returned. "How curious. Well, if it should turn up, I'd be most grateful for its return. There are items of sentimental value in the pockets." "Of course, Mr. Hale." He tipped his hat, a gesture of politeness that felt like a threat. "Good day, Mrs. Hart." When the door closed behind him, Felicity's knees nearly buckled. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack bone. He knew. Perhaps not with certainty, but he suspected. She had perhaps hours before he returned with less polite inquiries. Her hands moved with sudden, desperate efficiency. She gathered a small canvas bag, not too large to draw attention, and filled it with the essentials: a shawl, a canteen, a small purse of coins Thomas had left her, and a folding knife she kept for cutting thread. the dress with its hidden evidence she was already wearing. Cedar Falls had a marshal, but Vernon Pike was a tired man, 2 years from retirement, who took his lunch at Hale's expense. Going to him would be suicide. She needed to reach Stone Bridge, 40 miles north, where the deputy U.S. Marshal kept his office, a man supposedly beyond the reach of mining company bribes. 40 miles through wilderness country, with Victor Hale's men certainly watching the roads. Felicity locked the shop door behind her and walked quickly toward the stable at the edge of town, forcing herself not to run. Running would draw eyes, but her heart raced ahead of her feet, and the weight of the evidence sewn into her hem felt heavy as iron shackles. She'd never ridden 40 miles alone. She'd never spent a night outside of a town. But Thomas had believed in her courage, even when she doubted it herself. "You're stronger than you know, Felicity," he'd said once, holding her hand through a difficult winter when money was scarce. "When the moment comes that tests you, you'll find that strength." The moment had come. She prayed he'd been right. Part 2. The Exile. 3 miles north of Cedar Falls, where the pine forest thickened and the mapped roads gave way to game trails, Hyamovi knelt beside a beaver dam and studied the water's surface. The light was fading, turning the world to shades of amber and shadow. His practiced eye caught the subtle V-wake of a beaver swimming beneath the surface, heading toward the lodge built against the far bank. Good. The traps he'd set yesterday would yield well tonight. Beaver pelts were fetching decent prices at the trading posts, and he needed supplies before winter came. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple cotton shirt traded from a merchant 2 seasons ago, both worn soft with use. His long black hair was tied back with a strip of leather, and the Colt Dragoon revolver at his hip, another trade this one for a winter's worth of prime furs, was meticulously maintained. In this country, a man's life often depended on his weapons. But Hyamovi preferred to depend on knowledge. Knowledge of the land, the animals, the way water flowed and wind spoke through pine branches. These things didn't betray you the way people did. 3 years since his exile from the Lakota band. 3 years since Red Horn, the chief's nephew, had accused him of stealing horses, a lie born of jealousy because Wichachpi Washtemna had chosen Hyamovi over the chief's favored kinsman. 3 years since the council, swayed by blood politics, had banished him rather than risk division. 2 years since he'd learned that Wichachpi Washtemna, waiting for him to clear his name and return, had died of fever. The wound of that loss had scarred over, but never healed. He carried it the way the land carried ancient fire scars, visible in certain lights, aching in certain seasons. Solitude had become both punishment and refuge. He spoke to no one unless necessary for trade. He trusted no one. The wilderness asked nothing of him except skill and respect in those he could give freely. The sound reached him just as he stood to check the next trap-line hoofbeats, coming fast and uneven through the forest. Hyamovi's hand moved instinctively to the revolver. Riders traveling this hard, this far from the roads, meant trouble. He faded back into the shadow of a pine trunk, becoming as still as stone. The horse burst into view, a roan mare, lathered with sweat and blowing hard. The rider was small, slight, hunched over the saddle. Not a man, a woman. She wore a dark dress plastered to her body with sweat, and her bonnet had come loose, hanging by its ribbons. Her face was pale with exhaustion and fear. As Hyamovi watched, she pulled the horse to a stumbling halt near the creek, half falling from the saddle. The mare's head drooped immediately, sides heaving. The woman staggered to the water's edge and collapsed to her knees, cupping water to her mouth with shaking hands. Behind her, perhaps a half-mile distant, Hyamovi heard more hoofbeats. Multiple riders moving with purpose. He should leave. This was not his concern. Whatever trouble pursued this woman, it would only bring complications into the careful solitude he'd built. But even as the thought formed, his feet were moving. Because he remembered another woman dying alone while he was exiled far away, unable to help. "Your horse is finished," he said quietly. The woman's head snapped up, eyes wide with terror. She scrambled backward, nearly falling into the creek. Hayamovi raised both hands slowly, showing them empty. "I mean no harm. But those men chasing you will be here soon. Your mare cannot run further." She stared at him, taking in his Lakota features, his buckskin clothing, the revolver at his hip. He saw the fear in her face shift and recalibrate. Not the same fear she'd shown at being startled, but something more complex. Calculation mixed with desperation. "Please," she said, and her voice cracked on the word. "Please, they'll kill me. I have evidence of—" She stopped, seeming to reconsider. "I need to reach Stone Bridge. The deputy U.S. Marshal." "Stone Bridge is 40 miles. Hayamovi glanced at her exhausted horse. "You will not make it." "Then I'll die trying." She struggled to her feet, swaying. The hoofbeats were growing louder. Hayamovi's mind worked quickly, weighing options he didn't want to consider. If he hit her, those men would search. If they were the sort to chase a lone woman into the wilderness with killing intent, they wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone who sheltered her. Smart thinking said to walk away. But Wichapi Washtemna's face rose in his memory, and the words she'd spoken to him once. "Courage is not the absence of fear, Hayamovi. It is choosing right action, despite it." "Come," he said. "Quickly." Relief flooded the woman's face, so intense it was almost painful to witness. "Thank you. Thank you, Save your breath. We must move." He grabbed the mare's reins, leading the exhausted horse into the thicker undergrowth where shadows pooled deep. "Follow exactly where I step. Leave no trail." To her credit, she obeyed without question, gathering her skirts and moving with surprising care for someone so exhausted. Hayamovi led them 50 yards upstream, then across the creek where stones offered dry passage, then into a dense stand of pine, where the ground was soft with needles that would show minimal tracks. His winter camp lay another quarter-mile ahead, a small shelter built low against a rock outcropping nearly invisible, unless you knew where to look. He'd chosen the location for its concealment and defensive position. Now he hoped that caution would serve them both. Behind them, the pursuing riders reached the creek. Hayamovi pressed a finger to his lips. The woman nodded, her eyes huge in her pale face. He could see her trembling, not just with fear, but with exhaustion. She'd been riding hard for hours, perhaps, without rest or food. "Tracks end here." A rough voice carried through the trees. "She can't have just disappeared. Search the banks, she's on foot now, can't be far. Mr. Hale wants her alive if possible. She's got something of his." There it was, the confirmation that these were not lawmen, but hired thugs. And they were hunting something specific. Hayamovi's hand rested on the revolver's grip as he listened to them crash through the underbrush, spreading out to search. Minutes stretched. The woman beside him had gone absolutely still, her hand pressed to her mouth as if to physically hold back any sound. Finally, after what felt like an hour, but was perhaps 20 minutes, the lead rider called the others back. "We've lost her. It'll be dark soon. We'll report back and get more men sweep this area at first light." The hoofbeats retreated, fading south toward Cedar Falls. Hayamovi waited another 10 minutes, listening to the forest settle back into its evening rhythms. Only when he was certain they were alone did he speak. "They will return tomorrow with more men. You cannot stay here." The woman sagged against a tree trunk, and he saw how close she was to collapse. "I know. I need a moment. Please." He studied her, this strange, desperate creature who'd crashed into his solitude. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 23 or 24, with brown hair escaping its pins and eyes the color of creek water in sunlight. There was something determined in the set of her jaw despite the exhaustion. "What is your name?" he asked. "Felicity Hart, Mrs. Felicity Hart." She paused. "A widow. I am called Hayamovi." He didn't offer more. Names were power, and he'd learned to share as little as possible. "Thank you for helping me." Her eyes met his directly, and he saw genuine gratitude there, not the performative politeness of white society, but something real. "I won't forget this. Thank me when you are safely in Stonebridge." He turned, gesturing to the path ahead. "My camp is near. You will rest tonight. Tomorrow, we decide what to do." As they walked through the deepening twilight, Hayamovi felt the familiar walls of his solitude cracking. He'd helped her on impulse, perhaps foolishly. But there was no undoing it now. And somewhere beneath the regret and caution, a small voice whispered that perhaps solitude had been its own kind of exile, one he'd imposed on himself long after the council's judgment had ended. He silenced the voice and led Felicity Hart toward shelter, toward complications, toward a path he couldn't yet see. But the first step was taken. Part 3. Shelter and Suspicion. Hayamovi's winter camp was more substantial than Felicity had expected. Not just a crude lean-to, but a carefully constructed shelter built into the natural protection of a stone overhang. Pine branches woven with earth formed walls that would turn rain and wind, and inside dried grass and furs created a floor that was surprisingly warm. The entrance was low and concealed by brush invisible from more than 20 feet away. "You built this yourself?" she asked as he pulled aside the brush covering. "2 winters ago." "Fokar," he ducked inside, emerging a moment later with a fire striker and a small iron pot. "It serves." The understatement was so profound that Felicity almost smiled despite her exhaustion. The camp showed signs of long habitation, a neat stack of firewood animal pelts stretched on frames for drying a string of herbs hanging from the overhang's edge. This wasn't just shelter. It was a home, carefully tended. Hayamovi built a small fire in a ring of stones, positioned to dissipate smoke through the branches above. The flames caught quickly, and the light pushed back the gathering darkness. Felicity sank down onto a log he'd positioned as seating, and the weight of the day crashed over her. She'd left Cedar Falls 8 hours ago. 8 hours of hard-riding terror clutching her throat every time she'd heard hoofbeats behind her. She'd tried to stay on game trails, hoping to avoid notice, but the men had found her anyway. If not for this strange Lakota exile, she'd be dead or captured now. "You should eat," Hayamovi said, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. He'd produced pemmican from somewhere, dried meat, pounded with berries, and fat wrapped in oiled cloth. He handed her a piece without ceremony. Felicity's stomach clenched with hunger at the sight of it. "Thank you." She bit into the pemmican, and the rich, dense food was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. Manners said she should eat slowly, delicately. Survival said otherwise. She finished the first piece in 4 bites. Hayamovi watched her with dark, unreadable eyes, then handed her another piece. "Eat. Then you will tell me why Victor Hale's men want you dead." The name hung in the air between them. Felicity swallowed the pemmican, then reached for the canteen he offered. The water was cold and clean-tasting of mountain snow melt. When she'd drunk her fill, she met his gaze. "You know who Victor Hale is?" "I trade furs in Cedar Falls sometimes. I hear things." His expression didn't change. "He owns most of the town through the mine company. Men like that do not send riders to hunt widows without reason." Felicity's hand moved instinctively to the hem of her dress, where the evidence lay hidden. Could she trust this man? He'd saved her life, yes, but she knew nothing about him. He was Lakota, living alone in exile. What if he decided the reward for turning her in was worth more than a stranger's gratitude? But what choice did she have? He's poisoning the Snake River, she said quietly. The mine dumps amalgam tailings mercury upstream. It's killing the livestock. It's killing children. Hayamovi's expression shifted minutely, a tightening around his eyes that might have been anger. You have proof of this. I found documents. A ledger page and a freight receipt hidden in a coat he left at my shop for mending. She touched her hem again. I sewed them into my dress. If I can reach the Deputy U.S. Marshal in Stonebridge. They will kill you before you reach Stonebridge. His voice was flat, stating fact. Hale has money and influence. The roads will be watched. Then what am I supposed to do? The words came out sharper than she'd intended, edged with desperation. Let him keep poisoning people. The Garrett twins are 7 years old. They can barely walk now. Their mother cries every time she sees them. Silence stretched between them. The fire crackled, sending sparks upward into the darkness. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called. You are very brave or very foolish, Hayamovi said finally. Perhaps both. I'm neither. I'm just someone who knows the truth and can't unknow it. Felicity wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. My husband Thomas died 14 months ago. An accident at the mill, a chain broke, and he was crushed by falling timber. I've spent every day since trying to understand why. Why him, why then? And I realized there is no why. Things happen because people make choices. Good choices or evil ones. She looked up, meeting Hayamovi's eyes. Victor Hale made an evil choice. Maybe I'm just a seamstress who doesn't know anything about wilderness or survival. But I know what's right. And I can't let him keep killing people just because I'm afraid. Something shifted in Hayamovi's expression, a crack in the stoic mask. For just a moment she saw pain there, old and deep. Courage despite fear, he said softly, as if speaking to someone else. Then his walls went back up. You will stay here tonight. I will keep watch. Tomorrow we will find a way to get you to Stonebridge that does not use the roads. Relief washed through her so powerfully that tears pricked her eyes. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. The journey will be hard. He stood, moving to the shelter's entrance. Sleep. You will need strength. Felicity wanted to argue that she should take a turn at watch, that she could be useful, but her body was already betraying her exhaustion, pulling her down like an undertow. She lay down on the furs Hayamovi indicated, and within moments sleep dragged her under. Outside, Hayamovi fed another branch to the fire and settled into the watchful stillness he'd perfected over 3 years of solitude. The forest spoke to him in languages most people never learned: the difference between wind-moved branches and human-moved ones, the warning calls of birds, the quality of silence that meant predators near. He would hear anyone approaching long before they arrived. His thoughts drifted to the woman sleeping in his shelter. Felicity Hart, a widow who'd chosen righteousness over safety, who'd sewn evidence into her dress and fled into wilderness rather than be complicit in murder. It reminded him achingly of Wichapi Washtemna, who'd stood before the council and spoken truth even when they wouldn't hear it, who'd chosen him despite the political consequences. He'd failed to protect her. Perhaps this was a chance at something like redemption, though he didn't believe in such things anymore. Or perhaps it was simply that after 3 years of speaking to no one, of trusting no one, this strange, brave widow had reminded him what it meant to stand for something beyond survival. The fire burned low. Hayamovi added wood carefully, keeping the flames small and the smoke minimal. His hand rested on the revolver's grip, and his eyes scanned the darkness with predator's patience. Tomorrow would bring hard choices. Tonight, he would make sure Felicity Hart lived to face them. Part 4. The Betrayer's Choice. Dawn came cold in gray mist, rising from the creek in ghostly coils. Felicity woke to the smell of wood smoke and something cooking fish she realized spitted over the fire. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache, muscles protesting yesterday's desperate ride. Hayamovi sat cross-legged by the fire, turning the fish with careful attention. He looked as though he hadn't slept at all, but there was no sign of exhaustion in his movements. "Eat," he said when he noticed her stirring. "Then we must move." They ate quickly in silence. The fish was simple but good-flavored with herbs she didn't recognize. When they'd finished, Hayamovi kicked dirt over the fire and began breaking down the camp with efficient, economical movements. "Where are we going?" Felicity asked, trying to help, but mostly staying out of his way. "North, but not directly. The roads will be watched." He secured supplies into a leather pack. "There is a farmer 2 hours west, Samuel Briggs. His land borders the river. If he will give us fresh horses and supplies, we can reach Stone Bridge by tomorrow night." "Will he help?" Hayamovi's expression was unreadable. "He is a cautious man, but his daughter is sick. If the river is poisoned..." He didn't finish the thought. They set out as the sun broke through the mist, turning the world to gold and shadow. Hayamovi moved through the forest, like water flowing, reading the land with practiced ease. Felicity followed, trying to step quietly, trying not to slow them down. Her dress was wholly impractical for wilderness travel, but she gathered the skirts and managed. 2 hours became 3 as they circled wide to avoid any chance of encountering searchers. Finally, the forest opened onto cleared land, a modest farm with a cabin, a barn, and fields showing the stubble of harvested wheat. A man was working near the barn, repairing fence rails. He looked up as they approached, and his weathered face showed surprise, followed quickly by wariness. "Hayamovi," he said, setting down his hammer. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Samuel Briggs." Hayamovi nodded respectfully. "I need your help." Samuel's eyes shifted to Felicity, taking in her dusty dress and exhausted face. "Who's this?" "Felicity Hart from Cedar Falls. She has evidence that Hale and Company is dumping mercury into the Snake River. She must reach the Deputy U.S. Marshal in Stone Bridge." Samuel's expression shuddered immediately. "That's a bold claim." "It's true," Felicity said, stepping forward. "I have documents. Ledgers proving months of dumping. Mr. Briggs, your farm is near the river. You've seen the livestock dying, haven't you? The Garrett children?" "I know about the Garrett children." Samuel's voice was tight. "I know about a lot of things. But I also know that crossing Victor Hale is a good way to end up dead or ruined." "So you'll do nothing?" The words burst from Felicity before she could stop them. "You'll let him keep poisoning the water." Samuel's jaw clenched. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "My daughter Lily is 8 years old. She's been sick for 2 months. Strange fever's weakness. Doc Morrison doesn't know what's wrong with her." His hands curled into fists. "My wife Emma is terrified she'll die, and I'm 3 months behind on my mortgage, a mortgage held by Hale and Company." Understanding crashed over Felicity like cold water. Samuel Briggs knew the truth. He'd probably known for months, but he had a sick child and a debt that could take everything. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't know." "No, you're just trying to do right." Samuel looked away toward the cabin. where a thin wisp of smoke rose from the chimney. But right doesn't always win. Sometimes it just gets you buried. Samuel, Hayamovi said, and there was something almost gentle in his voice. We need horses, fresh ones, and supplies for 2 days' travel. I will pay what I can. I can't. Samuel's voice cracked. I'm sorry. I can't risk it. If Hale finds out I helped you, he'll foreclose. We'll lose the farm. And Lily, we won't be able to afford her medicine. The silence that followed was crushing. Felicity felt something break inside her chest, not anger, but a terrible, aching understanding. Samuel Briggs wasn't a coward. He was a father, trapped between impossible choices. I understand, she said. I'm sorry for asking. They turned to leave. Wait. Samuel's voice stopped them. When Felicity looked back, she saw conflict written across his weathered face, fear warring with something deeper. There's an old trapper's trail, he said slowly. Runs north through the high country. It's rough going, but it'll keep you off the roads. If you follow the creek west from here for 5 miles, you'll find the start of it. Thank you, Hayamovi said quietly. Samuel nodded once, and then turned away, his shoulders bent, as if under tremendous weight. He picked up his hammer and returned to the fence, striking the nails with more force than necessary. As they walked back into the forest, Felicity's throat was tight. He wanted to help. Yes, but he's too afraid. He is a father first. Hayamovi's voice held no judgment. Fear for those we love is the strongest chain. They found the creek and began following it west. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Felicity's mind kept returning to Samuel's face, the conflict there, the shame. She wondered if that was what evil truly looked like. Not monsters and villains, but ordinary people making small compromises, one after another, until the accumulated weight of those compromises crushed any chance of resistance. Behind them, unseen and unknowing, Samuel Briggs finished repairing the fence. Then he stood for a long moment, staring at nothing before walking slowly toward his cabin. Inside, his wife Emma was spooning broth into their daughter's mouth. Lily's face was pale, her eyes too large in her thin face. Samuel watched them and felt the chains of fear tighten. That night, after Emma and Lily were asleep, he saddled his horse and rode toward Cedar Falls, toward Victor Hale's office, toward a choice he would never be able to unmake. Part 5. The False Ally. The trapper's trail was exactly as brutal as Hayamovi had expected, steep switchbacks climbing through rocky terrain overgrown with brush that tore at clothing and skin. They made slow progress, stopping frequently for Felicity to rest. She never complained, but he could see the exhaustion deepening in her face, the way she stumbled over roots she should have seen. By late afternoon, they'd covered perhaps 8 miles. The high country opened around them, pine forests giving way to open meadows dotted with wildflowers gone to seed. Beautiful and exposed. Hayamovi was scanning the trail ahead when he heard hoofbeats. His hand went to the revolver, but the rider who emerged from the tree line was alone and familiar. Samuel Briggs, on a lathered horse, riding hard. Hayamovi stepped into the trail, hand still on his weapon. Beside him, Felicity tensed. Samuel pulled his horse to a stop, breathing hard. His face was flushed, and his eyes held something bright and feverish determination or desperation, difficult to tell which. I had to come. He said, the words tumbling out. I couldn't just let you go alone. Not after what I said this morning. Felicity stepped forward. Mr. Briggs. No, please, let me speak. Samuel dismounted, and Hayamovi saw his hands shaking as he held the reins. I've been a coward. I told myself I was protecting my family, but what kind of father am I if I teach my daughter that right and wrong don't matter when things get difficult? He took a breath, steadying himself. I can guide you through the high country. I know these trails I used to trap up here before I took up farming. And I can... He paused, then continued. I can stand with you when you face hail. Testimony from a landowner, someone who's seen the poisoning firsthand, that'll carry weight with the deputy U.S. Marshal. The speech was brave and noble, and Hayamovi felt every instinct in his body screaming that something was wrong. Samuel's eyes were too bright. His hands shook not with fear, but with something else, guilt, perhaps. His horse was lathered as if it had been ridden hard for hours, but the trail from his farm should have taken less than 2. Where had Samuel Briggs been? You came alone? Hayamovi asked quietly. Yes. I left after Emma and Lily went to sleep. I didn't want... Samuel's voice caught. I didn't want Emma to try to stop me. She'd be too afraid. Plausible. Reasonable. And yet... Hayamovi's eyes met Felicity's, and he saw uncertainty, their gratitude warring with the same instinctive caution he felt. Mr. Briggs, she said carefully, if you help us, Victor Hale will know. He'll come after you. Your farm, your family. I know. Samuel's voice was firm. But Lily's getting sicker every day. The doctor says if we can't figure out what's wrong... He didn't finish. If the water is poison, that's what's killing her. Helping you is helping her. It's the only way. The logic was sound. The emotion was genuine. And they desperately needed someone who knew these trails. Every piece of Hayamovi's hard-won survival instinct said to refuse. But Felicity was looking at Samuel Briggs with hope dawning in her exhausted face, and Hayamovi remembered her words from last night. I'm just someone who knows the truth and can't unknow it. Perhaps Samuel Briggs had reached the same place. Or perhaps Hayamovi's 3 years of solitude had made him too suspicious too quick to see betrayal in ordinary human courage. Thank you, Felicity said, and her voice broke with relief. Thank you for coming back. Samuel's expression crumpled for just a moment, a flash of something that might have been anguish before he mastered it. We should keep moving. I know a place we can camp tonight, defensible and hidden. Tomorrow we'll push for Stone Bridge. They continued north, now a party of 3. Samuel led them with confident familiarity, pointing out shortcuts and easier routes. He spoke little, but when he did, it was about the land, how the trails connected where water could be found, which passes would be snowbound in another month. Hayamovi followed watching the set of Samuel's shoulders, the way his eyes scanned the trail ahead, watching for anything that might confirm or deny his suspicions. But Samuel Briggs played his part perfectly. As twilight fell, they reached the campsite. Samuel had promised a shallow cave in a rocky hillside with a clear view of the approaches. Good defensive ground, or a perfect place for an ambush. I'll gather firewood, Samuel offered. No fire? Hayamovi said. Smoke can be seen for miles. Right, of course. Samuel nodded quickly. I wasn't thinking. They ate cold rations as darkness fell pemmican and hardtack from Hayamovi's supplies. Felicity was so exhausted she could barely chew, and Hayamovi insisted she sleep first, while he and Samuel kept watch. When her breathing had deepened into sleep, Hayamovi turned to Samuel. You took a great risk coming after us. I know. Samuel's voice was quiet. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. Your wife will be afraid when she wakes and finds you gone. I left a note, told her I'd gone to town for medicine. Samuel's hands twisted together. It's not far from the truth. If this stops the poisoning, it is medicine. For Lily and every other child drinking from that river. The words were right. The emotion was right. Everything Samuel Briggs said and did was exactly what a man of conscience would say and do. And yet, "You should sleep," Hayamovi said. "I will keep first watch." "Are you sure you've been awake since yesterday?" "I am accustomed to it. Sleep." Samuel hesitated, then nodded. He lay down near the cave's entrance, wrapped in his coat, and within minutes appeared to be sleeping. Hayamovi sat in the darkness, revolver across his lap, and watched the approaches. But more than that, he watched Samuel Briggs. The farmer's breathing was too quick for true sleep. His body held tension that unconsciousness should have released. And twice in the deep hours of night, Hayamovi saw him open his eyes to stare at the cave's ceiling, at the gaze of someone woken briefly, but the hollow stare of someone who knew sleep wouldn't come. The look of a man carrying unbearable guilt. Hayamovi said nothing, made no accusation, because proof was not yet certainty, and striking too soon could be as fatal as waiting too long. But he did not sleep. And when dawn came gray and cold, he checked the loads in his revolver with extra care. Whatever Samuel Briggs was truly here to do, the moment of revelation was coming soon. Hayamovi intended to be ready. Part 6. The First Betrayal. They broke camp with the dawn moving quickly through terrain that grew progressively rougher. Samuel maintained his role as guide, leading them along a ridge trail that offered good views of the country below. Too good, perhaps. From this height they could see for miles, which meant anyone below could see them as well, if they knew where to look. Hayamovi's unease grew with each passing hour. Around midday, they descended into a small valley where a freight road cut through one of the supply routes that connected the mining camps to the towns. Samuel suggested they cross quickly to reach the northern trail continuation. "We'll be exposed for perhaps 200 yards, he said, pointing. "But if we move fast, we should be fine." "Exposed to what?" Felicity asked. "This road is miles from Cedar Falls." "To anyone passing by," Samuel said. "Freight wagons, prospectors, better not to be seen at all." The logic was sound, but as they approached the road, Hayamovi's instincts screamed warning. The valley was too quiet. No bird calls, no small game rustling in the brush. And their recent tracks in the dust of the road. Multiple horses, perhaps an hour old, stopped here before moving on. "Wait," Hayamovi said, his hand raised. Samuel stopped, turned. "What's wrong?" "Someone was here recently. We should find another crossing point. That will add hours to our journey." Samuel's voice held an edge of desperation. "Mrs. Hart is exhausted. We need to reach Stone Bridge by tonight, or—" The sound of hoofbeats interrupted him. They came from the north, multiple riders moving at a canter along the freight road. Hayamovi grabbed Felicity's arm and pulled her back into the tree line, dropping behind a fallen log. Samuel followed, but not before Hayamovi saw something flash across his face. Not surprise. Recognition. The riders came into view. 4 men hard-faced and armed. Leading them was a man with a distinctive scar running from his eye to his jaw, one of Victor Hale's enforcers recognizable from Hayamovi's occasional visits to Cedar Falls. They should have ridden past. Instead, they pulled up exactly where Hayamovi and his companions had been standing moments before. Scarface scanned the tree line with a predator's focus. "I know you're there, Briggs," he called out. "No point hiding. You brought them like you promised. Time to finish the job." The words fell like stones into still water. Felicity's head snapped toward Samuel, her face white with shock. "What?" Samuel wouldn't meet her eyes. He stood slowly, hands raised, and the anguish in his expression was terrible to see. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. They said they'd foreclose, take everything. And Lily? Lily needs medicine I can't afford. They promised to forgive my debt pay for her treatment. I didn't. I had no choice. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife, because it was motivated not by cruelty, but by desperation. Samuel Briggs was no monster. He was simply a father who'd chosen his daughter's life over strangers' justice. Hayamovi understood it, and hated it, and had no time for either emotion because Scarface and his men were dismounting, spreading out to flank them. "Let the woman go," Scarface said, his voice conversational. "She's got something Mr. Hale wants. Hand it over and we might let you live, Injun." Hayamovi's hand moved to his revolver, but Felicity's hand on his arm stopped him. "Don't," she said quietly. "You can't fight 4 armed men. I have fought worse odds. And if you die protecting me, this evidence dies too." Her eyes met his, and he saw not fear, but resolve. "Let me go. Take the documents to Stonebridge yourself." "No." The word came out harder than he'd intended. 3 years of solitude shattered by 2 days with this brave, stubborn widow, and he would not watch her die. Not when he'd failed to save Wichapi Washtemna. Not again. "There's another way," Samuel said suddenly. His voice shook, but his eyes had cleared. "The freight wagons that supply the mines one's due through here in an hour. If you could hide in the cargo—" "Shut up, Briggs," Scarface snapped. "You've done your part. Time to hand them over." "I brought them here like you asked." Samuel's desperation was real raw. "You said you wouldn't hurt them, just take the documents." "Plans changed." Scarface drew his pistol. "Now step aside." What happened next occurred in the space of heartbeats. Samuel Briggs, who'd betrayed them for his daughter's life, made a different choice. He dove forward, not away, straight at Scarface, grappling for the man's gun. "Run!" he shouted. "Run!" The gun discharged. Samuel cried out, but held on, and chaos erupted as the other 3 men rushed forward. Hayamovi didn't think. He moved. His revolver cleared leather and fired once, twice, both shots aimed, carefully striking the nearest enforcer in the shoulder and leg, dropping him without killing. He grabbed Felicity's hand and ran north into the forest as gunfire erupted behind them. Behind them, Samuel Briggs bought their escape with his blood. They ran until Felicity's legs gave out, until the sounds of pursuit faded, until Hayamove found another shelter, a tangle of boulders forming a cave-like hollow. He pulled her inside, and they collapsed together, gasping for breath. "He saved us," Felicity said, her voice breaking. "After he betrayed us, he saved us." "He did." "Do you think he's alive?" Hayamovi thought of the gunshot, the odds. "No." Felicity covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook, but she made no sound. Grief swallowed and compressed, because there was no time, no safety for mourning. "He had a daughter," she whispered. "Lily, 8 years old." "I know." "What will happen to her now?" Hayamovi had no answer. The cruelty of it was vast and simple. Samuel Briggs had betrayed them to save his daughter, then died to save them. And his daughter would still lose her father. There was no justice in it. No meaning. Only waste. "We should keep moving," he said quietly. "They will search this area." Felicity lowered her hands. Her eyes were red, but dry. "How far to Stonebridge?" 15 miles, but the road is certainly watched now. Then we go around the watchers." She touched the hem of her dress where the evidence still lay hidden. "Samuel died for this. We're not letting it be for nothing." Her voice held steel beneath the grief. Hayamovi nodded once. "Then we move at nightfall. For now we rest." They sat in silence as the afternoon faded, each carrying their own weight of guilt and determination. Outside, somewhere in the forest, Victor Hale's men continued their search. And in Cedar Falls, a little girl named Lily Briggs woke from fever dreams, calling for a father who would never come home. The price of truth continued rising. Part 7. Earned Shelter. They moved through darkness, Hayamovi leading with the confidence of someone who read the land like written language. The moon was a slim crescent, offering just enough light to navigate by. Felicity followed close, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder, so she wouldn't lose him in the shadows. Her body had moved beyond exhaustion into a strange state of numb endurance. Each step was mechanical, disconnected from conscious thought. But she didn't stumble, didn't slow. Because Samuel Briggs had died, so they could keep moving, and stopping would make his sacrifice meaningless. Around midnight, Hayamovi led them to a creek, and they followed it upstream for an hour, wading through water that numbed Felicity's legs, but left no tracks. When they finally climbed out, she was shaking with cold. "Here," Hayamovi said, guiding her into a small hollow beneath an overhang. "We can risk a small fire." He built it with the same economical skill he applied to everything: minimal smoke, maximum heat. As the flames grew, Felicity held her hands out, and the warmth was almost painful against her frozen fingers. "You need to remove the wet dress," Hayamovi said, not looking at her. "You will freeze otherwise." Propriety said no. Survival said otherwise. "Turn around," she said. He did immediately and without comment. Felicity's fingers fumbled with the buttons, cold, and fear had made them clumsy, but finally she managed to peel the sodden fabric away. Beneath her shift was damp, but not soaked. She wrapped herself in the blanket Hayamovi offered, then carefully extracted the evidence from the dress's hem. The oiled cloth she'd wrapped it in had held. The documents were dry. "You can look now," she said. Hayamovi turned back. His eyes went to the papers she held, then to her face. "You sewed them well." "I'm a seamstress. If I can't sew something to withstand water and running, what use am I?" The attempt at levity fell flat. They sat in silence as the fire burned. Felicity spread her dress near the flames to dry, and gradually feeling returned to her extremities. With it came the full weight of the day: Samuel's betrayal, his redemption, his death. "Do you think he knew?" she asked quietly. "When he came after us, do you think he already planned to betray us, or did something change?" Hayamovi considered the question seriously. "I think he agreed to betray us before he came. But I think he hoped until the very end that he would not have to." "Hope is cruel, then." "Sometimes." Hayamovi fed another stick to the fire. "But sometimes it is all we have." Felicity looked at him, truly looked for the first time with something other than desperation and exhaustion. She saw the careful control in every movement, the way he positioned himself between her and the forest, the methodical checking of his revolver before he'd allowed himself to rest. "You've been alone a long time, haven't you?" she said. His expression shuddered. 3 years. By choice. By exile. He paused, then continued, perhaps because darkness made confession easier, or perhaps because they'd been through too much for pretense. "I was accused of theft. Horse theft. A lie told by a rival who wanted the woman I loved." "What happened to her?" The pain that crossed his face was sharp and immediate. "She waited for me to clear my name. I could not. She died of fever while I was exiled." "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate. "It was 2 years ago." Hayamovi's voice was carefully neutral. "Wichapi Washtemna. It means good star woman. She believed in truth, even when no one would hear it." Understanding settled over Felicity like a blanket. That's why you helped me. Perhaps. He met her eyes. Or perhaps I was simply tired of being alone. The honesty in those words was almost painful. Felicity felt something shift in her chest, recognition of shared loneliness, shared grief. She'd spent 14 months as a widow, keeping the world at arm's length because opening herself to connection meant risking loss again. But here in the wilderness, running for their lives, she felt more connected to this Lakota exile than she had to anyone since Thomas died. "Thank you," she said, "for not being alone anymore." Hayamovi's expression softened minutely. "Sleep now. I will keep a watch. Wake me in a few hours. You need rest too." "I am accustomed. I don't care what you're accustomed to." Felicity's voice was firm. "We're in this together. That means we both rest and we both watch." "Agreed." For a moment she thought he'd argue. Then the corner of his mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. "Agreed." Felicity lay down, wrapped in the blanket, with the drying fire's warmth against her back. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Hayamovi settle into watchful stillness, his profile sharp against the firelight. She trusted him with her life by necessity at first. Now she trusted him by choice. And somehow, that made all the difference. Part 8. The trap closes. Dawn came with frost on the grass and cold white mist hanging in the hollows. Hayamovi had woken Felicity after 3 hours as promised, and she'd kept watch while he slept, though she suspected he'd only dozed lightly, waking at every sound. Now they moved through the last stretch of wilderness before Stone Bridge, the terrain flattening into rolling hills dotted with pine. According to Hayamovi's reckoning, they were perhaps 8 miles from town. So close. Close enough that Felicity could almost believe they'd make it. That's when they saw the smoke. Not the white smoke of campfires, but black greasy smoke rising in a thick column perhaps 2 miles ahead, right where the freight road crossed their path. "Something's burning," Felicity said, her stomach sinking. Hayamovi's expression was grim. "Or someone is sending a signal. Stay here." "No, we stay together." He looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. They moved forward cautiously, using the trees for cover, until they could see the source of the smoke. A freight wagon overturned, burning, and surrounding it, at least a dozen mounted men in a loose perimeter watching the approaches. Victor Hale's men. They'd guessed the route and set a trap. "We can't get through," Felicity whispered. "No." Hayamovi studied the perimeter, calculating. "But there is another way. Stone Bridge has a telegraph station. If we can reach it, you can send a message to the Deputy U.S. Marshal. He can come to you." "Where is the telegraph station?" "West edge of town, but the road is blocked." "Then we go around the road." Felicity's jaw set. "Through town if we have to." It was insane. But so was everything they'd done so far. They circled wide, giving the ambush point a berth of over a mile. The forest thinned as they approached Stone Bridge, giving way to scattered homesteads and cultivated fields. Dangerous territory, open ground where they could be seen easily. But Hayamovi moved with the same predator's care, using terrain and timing to slip between properties unseen. Once they had to flatten themselves in a drainage ditch as riders passed on the road above Hale's men searching. By early afternoon, they'd reached the outskirts of Stone Bridge proper. It was larger than Cedar Falls, perhaps 300 souls, with a main street, a church, and crucially, a telegraph office. "The problem," Hayamovi said quietly, "is that Hale's men will be watching the telegraph office. They know it's your best chance. Then we create a distraction." Felicity was thinking quickly now, desperation sharpening her mind. If something drew their attention to the other side of town, "I can create a distraction. You go to the telegraph office." No, we stay together, I know. His eyes met hers. But there is no together option here. One of us draws their attention, the other gets the message out. That is how we win. He was right, and Felicity hated it. Hated that survival meant separation. Hated that after 2 days of learning to trust someone again, she had to watch him walk into danger. "Don't die," she said, and her voice cracked. "Please, don't make saving me the last thing you do." Something shifted in Hayamovi's expression, surprise maybe, or recognition. "I will do my best not to." He reached out, and his hand rested briefly on her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity, of connection. Then he was moving, slipping through the scattered buildings toward the far side of town. Felicity waited, counting heartbeats, until she heard the sound of breaking glass, shouts a gunshot. The distraction had begun. She ran. The telegraph office was a small building on the west edge of town next to the freight depot. As she'd feared, 2 men stood outside, hired guns watching. But they were looking toward the commotion Hayamovi had created, not at a bedraggled widow approaching from the side. Felicity walked fast, but not quite running, trying to look like a townsperson curious about the noise. The guards noticed her, but too late she was through the telegraph office door before they could react. Inside, a clerk looked up in surprise. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we're not. I need to send an urgent message to the Deputy U.S. Marshal." Felicity pulled the documents from her dress, spreading them on the counter. "Victor Hale is dumping mercury into the Snake River. This is proof. Please, there are men outside who'll kill me to stop this message." The clerk's eyes went wide as he scanned the documents. Behind them, the door burst open, the guards finally reacting. "Step away from the counter, ma'am," one of them said. The clerk looked from the documents to the guards to Felicity's face. She saw the decision forming, saw him weigh safety against conscience. Then his hands moved to the telegraph key. "Run," he said. The clicking began Morse code, spelling out the message, even as the guards rushed forward. One grabbed the clerk, but the other lunged for Felicity. She dodged pure instinct and ran for the back door she'd seen. The guard caught her dress fabric tearing, but she pulled free and burst into the alley behind the building. Gunshots, shouting, the telegraph still clicking behind her. Felicity ran blindly, her only thought to lead pursuit away from the clerk, to give him time to finish the message. She ran through alleys and between buildings, hearing boots pounding behind her. A hand grabbed her arm, yanking her into a doorway. "Hayamovi." "This way," he said. And they ran together through a maze of back streets pursued by shouts and gunfire. The message was sent. Whatever happened now, the truth was out. They just had to survive long enough for it to matter. Part 9. The Platinum Pass. They ran until the buildings of Stone Bridge fell behind them, until they were back in wilderness, heading north. Behind them, the shouts had organized into pursuit. Mounted men coordinated search. "They'll catch us on foot," Felicity gasped. "Not if we take ground. Horses cannot follow." Hayamovi pointed ahead to where the terrain rose sharply, rocky slopes leading to higher ground. "The Platinum Pass mine. Abandoned 3 years ago when an easier seam was found. There are tunnels, places to hide." They climbed. Felicity's legs burned, her lungs screamed, but she didn't slow. Below, the pursuit was closing. She could hear horses' voices calling coordinates. The mine entrance gaped before them like a dark mouth. Hayamovi led them inside into darkness that stank of old earth and older metal. Behind them, the pursuers reached the base of the slope. "Can't take horses up that," one voice called. "We go on foot." In the darkness, Hayamovi's hand found Felicity's. "Stay close. The tunnels branch. It is easy to become lost." They moved deeper using the dim light from the entrance, until it faded entirely. Then Hayamovi stopped, and Felicity heard him working at something. A spark, then a small flame. He'd found an old mining lamp, still holding oil. The lamp's light pushed back the darkness, revealing tunnel walls shored with timber-side passages branching off like veins. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. "This way," Hayamovi said, leading them down a side tunnel. "There is another exit on the north face. If we can reach it before they realize..." Voices echoed from the entrance. Multiple men spreading out to search. They moved faster, the lamp casting wild shadows. The tunnel twisted, descended rows again. Once they passed a shaft dropping into darkness, the safety rails long since rotted away. Felicity pressed close to the far wall, not looking down. Finally ahead, light. Natural light, not lamplight. They emerged onto a narrow ledge on the mountain's north face. Below, a steep but manageable slope led down to a river valley. Behind in the tunnels, the search continued. "We made it," Felicity breathed. Then she saw the figure on the ledge ahead. Scarface, the enforcer from the ambush. He stood between them, an escape, his pistol already drawn. "End of the road," he said. "Mr. Hale said to bring you back alive if possible, but he'll settle for just getting those documents." His eyes were cold. "Your choice how this goes." Hayamovi's hand moved toward his revolver. "Don't," Scarface warned. "I'm faster and you know it." He probably was. But Felicity saw the calculation in Hayamovi's eyes, the willingness to try anyway, to die trying if it meant she might escape. Just like Samuel Briggs. Just like Wichapi Washtemna in a different way. She couldn't let it happen again. "Wait," Felicity said. She reached into her dress, pulling out the documents. "You want these? Take them." "No," Hayamovi started. "The message is already sent." Felicity continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The Deputy U.S. Marshal knows? These are just evidence now. You want them? Fine." She held them out. Scarface's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but greed won. He reached for the papers. Felicity threw them. Not toward Scarface, into the air over the ledge where the wind caught them and scattered them like snow down the mountainside. Scarface roared, lunging not for her, but for the papers, his body moving on instinct. And Hayamovi moved. The fight was brutal and brief. Hayamovi tackled Scarface away from the ledge, and they grappled for the gun. It discharged once, the bullet whining off stone. Then Hayamovi's fist connected once, twice, and Scarface collapsed. Hayamovi stood breathing hard, then picked up Scarface's gun. "We should go before the others arrive." They descended quickly, half sliding down the slope. Behind them, voices emerged from the mine, the other searchers drawn by the gunshot. But Felicity and Hayamovi were already at the bottom, already running. Ahead, the river valley opened into gentle terrain. And in the distance, perhaps 2 miles away, Felicity saw riders approaching from the north, official riders with Deputy U.S. Marshal badges glinting in the afternoon sun. The telegraph message had reached them. They were coming. "We made it," she said, and this time she believed it. "We actually made it." Hayamovi slowed to a walk and then stopped. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something like relief in his expression. "You scattered the evidence." The clerk at the telegraph office copied it before he sent the message. The originals were just paper. She smiled, exhausted and exhilarated. "Did you really think I'd risk everything we fought for?" "I think," Hayamovi said quietly, "you are more clever than you appear, Felicity Hart." The Deputy U.S. Marshal's posse reached them within minutes. The Marshal himself, a weathered man with sharp eyes named Clayton Ross, listened to Felicity's story with increasing anger. "Victor Hale," he said, spitting the name. "Been suspecting something wrong in Cedar Falls for months. This is exactly what I needed." "There's a clerk in the telegraph office in Stone Bridge," Felicity said. "He helped me. Please make sure he's protected." "I will." Marshal Ross turned to his deputies. "Half of you ride to Cedar Falls, arrest Hale and anyone working for him. The rest come with me to secure the mine and document the dumping site." As the deputies organized, Felicity felt the last of her adrenaline draining away. Her legs buckled. Hayamovi caught her before she fell. "Easy. It is over now." "Is it?" She looked up at him. "Victor Hale will go to prison. The dumping will stop. But Samuel Briggs is dead. His daughter will grow up without a father. The Garrett twins are still sick. How is that over?" "It is not." Hayamovi's voice was gentle. "But it is as much as we could do." Marshal Ross overhead. "Mrs. Hart, there will be a trial. We'll need you to testify." "I'll be there." "And you," Ross said to Hayamovi. "You're the Lakota exile, aren't you, Hayamovi?" Something shuddered in Hayamovi's expression. "Yes." "Heard about you. Heard about the accusation that got you exiled." Ross studied him. "Also heard Red Horn got drunk 2 months ago and admitted he lied. Something about jealousy over a woman. The Lakota Council is apparently looking for you. They want to make it right." The words hung in the air. Felicity felt Hayamovi go absolutely still. "Looking for me? If you want, I can get word to them. Let them know where you are." Ross's expression was kind. Man deserves a chance to clear his name. Hayamovi said nothing for a long moment. Then, I will consider it." As the marshal moved away to organize his men, Felicity touched Hayamovi's arm. "That's good news, isn't it?" "I do not know." His voice was distant. "For 3 years I have been alone by necessity. Now," he trailed off. Now he could go home, could reclaim his place, his name, his people, could leave her behind. Felicity felt the thought like a knife, surprising in its sharpness. She'd known this man for 2 days. 2 desperate, terrifying days. It shouldn't hurt to think of him leaving. But it did. "Whatever you decide," she said quietly. "Thank you. For everything." Hayamovi looked at her, and something in his expression was raw and uncertain. "Felicity, Marshal Ross needs statements," one of the deputies called. "Ma'am, if you could come with me." The moment broke. Felicity let herself be led away to give her testimony to begin the long legal process of making Victor Hale answer for his crimes. But she looked back once and saw Hayamovi standing alone, staring north toward Lakota lands, toward a future she suddenly desperately hoped wouldn't take him away from her. Part 10. New Horizons. 3 months later, the first snow of winter was falling on Cedar Falls when Felicity stood outside what had been her seamstress shop. The building looked the same, but everything else had changed. Victor Hale was in a federal jail awaiting trial for murder and public nuisance and the poisoning of a watercourse. His brother in San Francisco had disavowed all knowledge and sold the mining company to new owners who'd immediately ceased the mercury dumping and begun cleanup efforts on the Snake River. The Garrett twins were slowly recovering under Doc Morrison's care, though they'd never fully regain what the poison had taken from them. Samuel Briggs was buried in the Cedar Falls Cemetery. Felicity visited his grave weekly, bringing flowers and telling his headstone about the justice his sacrifice had helped achieve. His widow Emma had received a settlement from the new mine owners, not enough to truly compensate, but enough to keep the farm and pay for Lily's medicine. The girl was recovering. The river water was clean again. Some endings, at least, could be hopeful. The shop door opened, Marshal Ross emerged. "All your things are packed, Mrs. Hart. Deputy can take them to the station whenever you're ready." "Thank you, Marshal." Felicity glanced down the street one more time. She was leaving Cedar Falls. The town held too many memories of Thomas of Terror, of Samuel's betrayal and redemption. She'd accepted a position with a dressmaker in Denver, a fresh start in a city where her name wasn't known. "That Lakota fellow who helped you?" Ross said casually. "I got word to his people like I promised. They sent representatives to meet with him. Apparently, they've officially revoked the exile, apologized for the false accusation. He's welcome to return any time." Felicity's heart clenched. That's wonderful. He deserves that. Funny thing, though. He told them he'd consider it, but he had obligations elsewhere first. Ross's eyes were knowing. Said he'd given his word to see something through. Wouldn't say what. "Oh." The word came out breathless. "Anyway, your train leaves in an hour. You should head to the station." Ross tipped his hat. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Hart. You did a brave thing." Felicity walked slowly toward the station, her small bag of possessions in hand. Snow fell on her shoulders, melting against her warmth. Denver meant safety, anonymity, a chance to rebuild without the weight of the past 3 months. But it also meant not knowing if she'd ever see Hayamovi again. 3 months since that desperate flight through the wilderness. 3 months since she'd testified at the trial, her words helping to condemn Victor Hale. 3 months of thinking about a Lakota exile who'd saved her life and taught her that courage could exist alongside fear. She'd written him one letter, care of the Deputy U.S. Marshal's office, not knowing if it would reach him. Thanking him. Telling him she was leaving Cedar Falls. Carefully not saying all the other things she wanted to say, because she had no right to them after 2 days of shared survival. The train station came into view. And standing on the platform, a solitary figure in buckskin and a wool coat, was Hayamovi. Felicity's breath caught. She stopped walking, suddenly uncertain. He looked different not in appearance, but in the way he stood. Less like a man hiding, more like someone who'd made a choice and was at peace with it. He saw her and walked forward to meet her halfway. "You came," she said. "You wrote." His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes were warm. "You said you were going to Denver." "I am. There's a position waiting, a fresh start." "That is good. You deserve that." He paused. "Denver is a large city. They will need hunters to provide game for the restaurants, trappers to supply furs for the cold winters." Understanding dawned, slowly bright as sunrise. "You're coming to Denver, if you do not object." Now she saw the uncertainty beneath his composure, the vulnerability of someone offering something precious and fearing rejection. "I told my people I would return after I fulfilled certain obligations. They understood." "What obligations?" Hayamovi met her eyes. "I told a widow I would see her safely to her destination. I keep my promises." "Denver is safe enough. You don't need to." "Perhaps I am not coming for obligation anymore." His voice was quiet, serious. "Perhaps I am coming because for 3 years I was alone by necessity, and then for 2 days I was not alone, and I find I do not wish to return to solitude." Felicity's throat tightened. "Hayamovi, I understand if you do not want." "Of course I want." The words came out fierce, surprising them both. "I've spent 3 months trying to convince myself that 2 days wasn't enough to know someone wasn't enough to miss them. But I was lying to myself." Something in his expression cracked open relief and joy, and something deeper, more complex. "Then we will go to Denver," he said. "Together." "Together," she agreed. The train whistle blew. They boarded side by side, finding seats near the back, where they could watch the wilderness roll by. As Cedar Falls disappeared behind them, Felicity felt the weight of the past 3 months, the past 14 months, finally begin to lift. "Tell me about Wichapi Washtemna," she said quietly. "If you want to. I'd like to know about her." Hayamovi was silent for a long moment. Then he began to speak, his voice low, telling her about the woman he'd loved and lost. Felicity listened, holding space for his grief, the way he'd held space for hers. And when he finished, she told him about Thomas, the good and the difficult, the laughter and the loss. They were two people scarred by betrayal and loss, learning to trust again. It wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, cultural differences, grief that resurged in unexpected moments, the simple difficulty of building something new from brokenness. But as the train carried them toward Denver, toward whatever future they'd build, Felicity thought about earned intimacy, about how trust wasn't granted in a moment, but built through shared hardship, through choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. They'd earned this, whatever this would become. Outside, snow fell on wild country, covering old scars with new white. Inside, two exiles sat shoulder to shoulder, no longer quite so alone. And ahead, through winter and into spring, the horizon opened wide with possibility.